Welcome everyone. Hopefully everyone's got into the virtual room okay. And we will start formal proceedings. So good afternoon everyone and welcome. Today is the Commission's public forum on our draft decision for Yarra Valley Water. My name is Rebecca Billings and I'm one of the Commissioners of the Essential Services Commission. Just to let you know, if you didn't get that notice, this forum is being recorded to ensure access to those unable to attend. Any statement, comment or question you make will be included in the recording, which we plan to make available on our website. To start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands wherever you are today. For me, that's the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of Yarra Valley Water's service area. I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people here today. So thank you to everyone for taking the time to come together this afternoon. First, I'd like to introduce a few of the Commission's key staff members. Executive Director of Price Monitoring and Regulation, Marcus Crudden. Senior Regulatory Manager, Dean Wickington, and many other members of the water team at the Commission. I would also like to extend my welcome to Pat McCafferty from Yarra Valley Water, and thank you for coming today along with some of your team members. And last but not least, I'd like to thank everyone else for being on this call today and making the time to join us on this discussion. So before we get to the agenda, some quick housekeeping. I'm sure we're all very familiar with this now, but if you have any questions or comments while someone is talking, please type them into the chat so we can build these into the conversation. Please keep your microphone muted when not speaking to avoid feedback and background noise. In addition to your participation today, you can also provide written feedback by the Engage Victoria website. And please do let us know if there is another preferred option for how we can engage with you. We are always open to feedback. The web address for Engage Victoria will be on the slides we are about to start sharing with you. I'll use the first part of today's forum to give you a brief introduction to our role in price regulation. But as always, the main purpose of this event is to hear from you and to have either the Commission or Yarra Valley Water answer any questions you might have. Today's discussion is structured into three parts. First, Dean will take you through how we assessed the price submission and came to our draft decision. Then Pat from Yarra Valley Water will have the opportunity to summarise some of the key features of the submission and respond to our draft decision. And then we will take the opportunity to hear from you. We appreciate being able to have an open and honest conversation with you today. Insights from these engagements do help us shape our decisions. So now just a little bit about us and our role. We regulate Victoria's energy, water and transport sectors, local government rate caps and the Victorian Energy Upgrades Program. We have been regulating water prices for more than 20 years, including for Yarra Valley Water. For the water sector, we approve prices and service standards, monitor and report on performance, and administer customer service codes. We are currently reviewing new water prices to apply from 1 July 2023 for 14 water businesses. The prices we approve reflect an assessment of the efficient costs water businesses need to recover to provide valued services to their customers. Following consultation, we issue a determination that sets the maximum prices that Yarra Valley Water may charge its customers. I'll now ask Dean to step us through how we assessed the price submission and came to our draft decision. Thanks, Dean.
Thanks, Rebecca. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I'll just run through briefly our process and just some how we, as Rebecca said, how we assess the price submission, also just some key things that sort of struck our attention and during our assessment. Just the slide you have there at the moment is really what we do is we assess a proposal from Yarra Valley Water, and we assess that against a set of rules which are largely embodied in something called the Water Industry Regulatory Order. They set out the criteria with which we need to assess a price submission, which are then reflected in the guidance that we give water businesses well in advance of price submission being lodged. That basically sets out the key things that we want to see in a price submission so we can assess it against the criteria in the Water Industry Regulatory Order and expectations about some of the processes that businesses go through. Embedded in that guidance is something called Primo, and it's a pricing approach that we took on, was implemented for the first time in 2018. And without going into detail too much, it's probably got a couple of key features about it. One, we expect that businesses engage really well with their customers to find out what they value most and what they want to see in submissions. And also the framework embodies rewards and penalties for businesses, if you like, if they do a good job engaging and thinking about things in terms of like how well they're adding value to their customers sort of influence the outcomes that a business gets from the review. There are a couple other acts there too, like the Water Industry Act and the ESC Act that we have regard to through the process. Next slide. Thanks, Lucy. As I said before, in terms of our process, Yarra Valley sort of leads the way with the price submission, and we assess it against the guidance that we've issued and the relevant legislation. We issue a draft decision, which we did for Yarra Valley Water and Western Port Water last December. And the draft decision really indicates what we're looking to approve or not approve, and allows Yarra Valley Water and other stakeholders to respond before we make a final decision that we'll put out in June this year, or by June this year. As I mentioned before, we did put out a draft decision for Yarra Valley in December, and that was a fast track decision that we released. It just reflected that we were able to assess pretty quickly that Yarra Valley Water, in our initial view, had satisfied the requirements of our guidance and also the Water Industry Regulatory Order. Next slide. Thanks, Lucy. Great. In terms of timing and just sort of positioning where we're at, draft decision came out on the 20th of December. We're at the red arrow there in our consultation phase. Submissions close on the 10th of March. So there's two and a half weeks there left to go. And we'll make a final decision in June. The new prices that we'll determine in June will take effect on the 1st of July this year. And under Yarra Valley Water's proposal, they'll run for a 5-year period to 2028. Thanks, Lucy. Next slide. In terms of our assessment, we do a range of things when we're assessing a price submission. I alluded to some of it earlier. We look at Yarra Valley Water's engagement and how it considered feedback in developing its proposal. So we really want businesses to find out what their customers think and what their customers prioritise and reflect that, or at least show us how they've considered that feedback in proposals. We test the underpinning assumptions that sort of feed into the calculation of prices, and the main ones is expenditure and also demand forecasts. We go through the expenditure forecast put to us by a business. We have a consultant help us out through this process to review the proposed expenditure, which covers operating capital costs. And we're focused on making sure that the expenditure that feeds into prices reflects prudent and efficient expenditure only. We do some verification checks on the data entered into the models that help calculate prices, and really look to the businesses to provide good justification for things like why they need the expenditure, how did they come up with their demand forecasts and things like that. And we also think about how Yarra Valley Water's performed over the current regulatory period. Have they delivered what they said they would to their customers? Next slide, Lucy. Thank you. Our draft decision largely accepted Yarra Valley Water's proposals, as you could expect if we're fast tracking a price submission process. I think that was really underpinned by, we had strong confidence that Yarra Valley Water had engaged really well with its community. It did do that in 2018. And I think, again, what we saw in their submission was some real good strengths around how it engaged with customers and made sure it got the breadth of views. So continuing with the citizens jury process, involving the community stakeholders in the design of its engagement program, engaging with Aboriginal customers, targeting customers that I'm often heard from, like those who are deaf or vision impaired and the young in the community who don't often feed into these processes, and also sequencing engagement. So one piece of engagement fed into the next phase and things like that. So we did have a strong degree of confidence that its proposed outcomes, what it was going to deliver, strongly considered customer views, and really, I think that was sort of embedded in how it packaged together its outcomes that it proposed to deliver, and also the prices that it ended up proposing as well. So without going into a lot of detail, I think Pat might come with some of this later on, but it provided some key outcomes that it wanted to deliver for customers. And what we saw in there was this overarching ambition and goal to embed caring for country in all its decision-making processes around the outcomes that it's going to deliver. And I think it was anything that the business does, which is what we saw as a real strength, and just reflected the consideration with which Yarra Valley Water put forward its outcomes package to us as well. Going down a little bit deeper on that, service improvements, I think there are focused things of improvements in there around things like adapting to climate change and climate resilience, reducing carbon emissions, asset security and water quality. The business is responding like others to growth, so that's a bit of a focus in its capital program, which is great. In terms of customer prices, in real terms, they'll fall from the 1st of July. So I think around 4.5–5% in year one, so 2023–24, and another 3% or so the year after. And one other strength that we saw in this, probably relative to others, a bit more nuanced thinking about the high inflation environment. So the business, Yarra Valley Water, has proposed a cap on nominal prices at 5% in the first 2 years of the period, and that is offered as an additional layer of protection, noting inflation at the moment is like 8% or thereabouts, and they do feed through to customers' prices. There are some refinements to tariffs to simplify things, particularly around the sewage disposal charge, which was well supported by customers. And the other thing that came through was accountability. So in the current period, Yarra Valley Water has a scheme where it turns money to customers if it doesn't meet some targets, and it's proposing to continue that in the next period as well. And it's probably of a magnitude that exceeds any other business. So I think there's a couple of things there around the confidence we had in its engagement program, and also the accountability that it sort of put itself on the hook really gave us confidence to fast track what was put forward. The next slide picks up on customer bills. It just embeds the current, these are real terms, so before inflation is added. You can see the reductions flowing through there too across different customers, residents, and also non-residential customers. So bills at the moment for a typical residential owner occupier, just a bit over 1,000. They'll fall from 1 July to 986 in real terms, and then to 956 in the last year of the upcoming regulatory period. So outcomes, I think, generally steady with some focused improvements, responding to growth and climate change and things like that, delivered with price cuts coming through are a good strength of the submission. The next slide basically shows, after going through their expenditure proposals, we didn't propose any adjustments to its operating costs. What we saw underneath the operating costs, they did embed a fairly high commitment to efficiency. I think it was about 1.7% or thereabouts, which I think is a bit better than the average across the sector at the moment, which is good. And a commitment to absorb some cost increases should they arise in the future, like labour cost growth, if that goes beyond expectations. In terms of the capital side of things, again, we go through that very closely around the asset planning, and is the program able to be delivered? Do the key projects target what the business is trying to achieve, things like that. So we approved what the business put forward in terms of its capital spend as well. Thanks, Lucy. The next couple of slides just pick up on the trends in firstly capital expenditure. So it does increase over the next period. I think a lot of that does respond to some of the growth that the business is seeing, and also focusing on water quality and reliability and so on. Costs have also increased through supply chains. So it's a reasonable step up in spend on the capital side of things. And similarly in the OPEX, that does embed a fairly good efficiency hurdle, but things like chemical costs and things like that have put some more pressure on the operating cost side of things for businesses. The trend there is fairly flat going forward. Thanks, Lucy. The next slide. So this is probably rounded out from here, but this is around Primo. So Yarra Valley Water put forward an advanced rating for Primo, which is the second highest rating you can get through the model, which is good. And we expect an advanced rating would correspond with additional value to customers, which we think it does, particularly given the real price reductions coming through. I think some other things are the businesses delivered on what it said it would in the current period and returned money where it's fallen short in some isolated areas. As I mentioned earlier, its engagement was strong. We actually agreed with their rating of leading for that, and it was inclusive and diverse. And its outcome targets were developed in close consultation with customers, which is fantastic. And it's accepted risk on behalf of customers in some areas. So trying to protect customers in the current environment was important. Next slide, Lucy, thank you. I think I've touched on this earlier. So, yep, so real price reductions coming through. The services that customers expect to see, like reliable water supply, high quality water, efficient treatment of sewage, responding to growth and things like that, will make sure customers continue to receive high levels of service while real prices are falling as well. And also a commitment by the business to reduce its environmental footprint and respond to climate change. So all of what we've put forward in our draft decision allows the business to deliver what it has said it would deliver to its customers, and also respond to policy, environmental standards and health as well. So I will leave it there, and I think we will hand over to Pat next. I'm happy to do that. Are you there, Rebecca? Yep.
Yeah, I can do that quickly. You can jump in here. So thank you, Dean, and hand over to Pat for his response.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks, Dean. I'd also like to recognise Brett, Janet and Cindy from Yarra Valley Water, who are on the call today. They've been working very hard on this submission, and I invite them to jump in as the conversation flows. But I do have a short presentation, which I guess for those of you who haven't had the chance to become familiar with what we proposed, I'll cover that off, and then the ESC has asked us some specific questions to respond to as well, and I'll cover those off as well before we get down to having a chat. So if I could share my screen, and hopefully this all works reasonably well. Hopefully now you can all see the presentation. Excellent, that's good. So I would like to obviously also start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands and the waterways, which were all variously gathered. I'm standing here in Mitcham on Wurundjeri land, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge, as Dean referred to, the profound impact that having elders in an Aboriginal working group involved at the very centre of our community engagement process, and the effect that that had on the people in the citizens jury who participated in our engagement. So much so that, yeah, their number one recommendation was in going forward that Yarra Valley Water adopt a care for country lens in all that we do. And so we're getting on with that as well as part of our reconciliation journey. So key messages, again, I think some of these were picked up by Dean, but we really did work hard to try to make sure that voices that don't normally get heard in such processes and engagements had a seat at the table and were heard through this process. So people who are hard of hearing, vision impaired, people who don't speak English, a lot of young people as well, and of course the Aboriginal Working Group. So the main message really is that maintaining and increasing services where we can while lowering the average bill across our customer base. And I think in the context of what the community has been going through with rising cost of living, certainly around essential services, we think that this is a really good outcome for the community. We will continue to significantly invest in our assets. There's a basic expectation there that we continue to maintain our critical water and sanitation assets on behalf of the community, as well as supporting the growth of Melbourne and looking after the natural environment. And so we have a bunch of outcomes that we've committed to, which we'll be very transparent about, we'll report against and monitor, and they reflect what the community has told us in terms of their basic expectations of our service and the value that they get from those. And as I said, we'll cover off the 4 areas where the ESC has been asking for some more clarification. Very quickly, Yarra Valley Water, we cover about 2 million people across the north and the east of Melbourne. We have, I guess, significant growth occurring in the Northern Growth Corridor. We have some of the fastest growing suburbs in Melbourne through Craigieburn, Mickleham, Mernda, Doreen. We also have the Yarra Ranges, which is, has a bit of a different risk profile, and we've certainly seen that in recent years in terms of storm events and so forth. So, it's quite a diverse customer base that we have. Our strategy is a 2030 strategy deliberately aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We think that is a really appropriate lens with which to look at the services that we provide and the impacts that we have on the community and the environment. Our purpose is all about health and wellbeing and creating a brighter future for communities and natural environment. 3 key pillars. Customer is really fundamental, obviously. That's where we get our social license to operate. That's why we're here. Affordability is a big call out there because, it's a UN human right to have access to safe, reliable and affordable water and sanitation services. We take that commitment really seriously. Helping communities thrive. This is really about ensuring that there's water for the long term. We can support a growing Melbourne in the context of climate change, and that we are adopting inclusion and connection in all that we do, and building resilience, or help build resilience and contribute to prosperity. And then finally, leading for our environmental future. Water utilities take from the environment. We have an impact on the environment, but we can also do things that can improve the environment. We're certainly on a pathway to net zero by 2025, adopting circular economics thinking in all that we do, and embracing biodiversity, which was a really key theme that came out from our jury process. And then finally, all of this happens through our people, and our culture is something that we hold very dearly in terms of managing the existence of a achievement, constructive oriented culture, and we put a lot of effort into that. So that's a little bit about Yarra Valley Water, but if we go into the current period, which is the 2018 to 2023 period, we think going forward, we've managed to take some great ground in a whole realm of areas. So certainly the outcomes that we committed to originally, we've been delivering against those. As Dean said, we have this large community rebate of $1.5 million per target. Where we don't miss it, where we don't achieve it, I should say, we reduce our prices the following year to reflect that. So we've managed to be able to get most of our targets for the period, which sort of indicates, there has been stretch in those targets as well, and it has pushed the business to new levels of performance. We also have that backed up by a very extensive guaranteed service level rebate scheme. In terms of customer perceptions, certainly, on a range of independent scoring by the regulator, we've had good increases in terms of the way our customers are seeing value, but also our comparative competition relative to all of our peers has been improving as well. From a customer service point of view, I think there's been some significant improvements in our service levels over the last 4 or 5 years. It's all there for people to see. And then finally, against the plan that we had put in place, we had a very ambitious productivity target of 2.5% per annum each year. We managed to get 2.36, which in the current environment, did push the business a fair bit, but we know that productivity underpins the affordability of the essential services. So we're absolutely all in on that. With our CapEx, again, we had a lot to do. Really pleasing that out of our major projects, 9 were all completed. We had a lot of other great outcomes from our capital investments. I'm just calling out that we've got our lowest non-revenue water in terms of reduction in leakages. It's it's up in the realms of Australian best practice, which we're really proud of. We know we always have to keep working on that, and putting in a technology foundation. The world is changing, and we've been investing in the IT infrastructure and systems that will enable transformation of some of our services going forward as well. As Dean alluded to, we have a pretty significant capital program. Won't go into the detail here other than to say that the renewals is all about maintaining the service and addressing any critical areas of risk in some of our major distribution mains. We're obviously having to support a growing Melbourne, and of course there are improvements mostly in the environmental, to get environmental outcomes and comply with environmental regulation, but as well as drinking water quality as well, to ensure we're managing that risk appropriately. I guess the highlight has been the fact that we have been going down in real terms since 2013. And we're going to continue that trend. So next year, 23-24, 4.5% below inflation price movement, followed by 3% roughly the following year, and then in line with inflation after that, flat bills. We know when we do the engagement that certainly customers have a strong preference for bills being stable, and it's really pleasing to see that between 2013-14 and 27-28, even in nominal terms, the bill will be about the same over that period. If we look at the outcomes that we've committed to, they're not too dissimilar from what we had committed to in 2018 and 23, and that's not unsurprising really, because they reflect what people expect and value. We have changed some of the terminology based on the engagement with the community to make it some really real, obvious language around those commitments. And as I said at the very top, overarching all of those commitments is that caring for country philosophy. And so moving on to the 4 areas where the ESC has asked for further thoughts from the organisation. The first one is around our proposed guaranteed service level for water quality. The second one is around our proposals in terms of who funds growth and how that gets paid for in terms of new customer contributions. The third one is around our forecasts, and then finally just some clarifications around the targets that we proposed. Okay, so in relation to the water quality advisory, what we have proposed in conjunction with the other Melbourne water utilities, because we all service the same population, is to adopt a community rebate for any water quality advisory that we might issue, and adopting that in a way that brings benefits back to the community, as well as if there is a water quality event, having a very simple, efficient process for people to claim recovery of their costs for any bottled water purchases. So the ESC has just asked for a little bit more feedback around that. And so our response, which will be in writing following today's discussion, is that we will be working with local government at Yarra Valley Water to identify water-related community projects. So what we're saying there is that if there's a water quality event in a particular local government area or in a postcode, we will consult with local government around the community assets there that might benefit from water efficiency investments, such as retrofitting of appliances, say a sports club or community housing, putting in rainwater tanks and those sorts of things. So anything that provides an overarching and long-term benefit to that local community. Also things like drinking stations and so forth. So that's what we're committed to doing, and we'll report when we've had an event. We will report the extent of that event and how that money is going back into the local community. And as I said, a very easy process for people if they do have to, in the circumstances, buy bottled water. And of course, we know Melbourne Water is having its major price review in 2026. So what we'd like to do is move forward with the proposal that we have, but then re-engage again, see how that's playing out, and whether or not there's any improvements that could be further adopted, and again in conjunction with Melbourne Water and consultation with Greater Western Water and South East Water, we would look to refine that if necessary. On the second question that the ESC had posed, so this is really about the contribution that people developers make to new assets, be it infill areas or for new suburbs. And we've been on a pathway. I mean, the obvious requirement or direction that we wanted to take is to have those charges being reflective of the costs that get incurred. It is a very complex area, I have to say, from an economic point of view. But our proposal really was to try to adopt a balanced perspective around how we might shift those contributions from the development sector to be even more cost reflective than they are now, while recognising that that does ultimately impact, the price of, new developments. So our proposal was an annual increase of 5% real, but capped at a 10% nominal. And the ESC has, been in discussions with the organisation to unpack that a bit more and to test some of the assumptions that we've been using. So in our response, certainly the methodology, we believe, has been very consistent with the overarching principles that the ESC has in place for such things. And we've been consistently applying that since 2013. And certainly in our discussions with people like the Urban Development Institute of Australia, they understand that, we had community sentiment coming through our jury process and other engagements that, people, want to see how this plays out in relation to their contribution to growth and also renewal of assets in the suburbs. So they're certainly aware of that. We're waiting, we have had further discussions and we are waiting a formal response from the development sector. So as I said, that proposal that we've got on the table, from our point of view, seeks to get a reasonable balance and a trajectory to having more cost-reflective customer contributions. The third element was around growth. Since we made our submission, Victorian future forecasts have been updated again. So we've had a look at that. We've applied them through our forecasts, and there's higher growth than what we had put in our plan as a consequence of those updated forecasts. So we'll just flow that through the financial templates, but our initial assessment is it's a further reduction in the upfront price of 0.4%. So we'll flow that through, and any other implications from those growths, those increased growth forecasts. But there's a further benefit there in price, obviously, as a consequence of that. And then finally, some clarification of measures. So we put 6 outcomes on the table and a whole bunch of, I guess we've gotten a little bit more granular in terms of the targets and commitments that we've made. So we've got 17 measures that sit underneath those 6 outcomes. We're going to transparently report those to the community and again, back that up by a very significant community rebate. Where we don't meet any of those particular outcomes that we've committed to. So the ESC had asked for a little bit more clarification on a couple of areas. I know that at officer level, we've been having those discussions and our response will reflect the outcome of those discussions. The only other thing to say about that is that there has been one target which we've modified, which is around the safe drinking water outcome that we committed to. We had a target of 100% compliance, but in order to be consistent with the rest of the water sector, we flipped that around so that it's a target of 0 non-compliances. Essentially the same outcome, but obviously we had the feedback from the ESC about being consistent, so happy to do that. Hopefully that's clarified those 4 areas. We'll certainly be going into writing in a bit more depth to unpack those in our response. But I think that probably takes us to the question part of the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. And you're absolutely right. It's time to hand over to stakeholders to pose questions or comments to either yourself or to the Commission. So is there anyone willing to be the first to put their hand up? And if not, oh, there's a few. That's great. Flavia, I think you might have been first. Would you like to ask the first question?
Thank you. Yes. Look, I'm not a stakeholder. I'm from Sydney Water, and we're very interested observers because we're entering our first primo-like period in the coming period. So we're looking to learn from Victorian utilities who've gone through this process a couple of times now. Pat, I was very interested to hear that you have a rebate process for instances of non-compliance where you contribute to the community in some form. Is that in addition to rebating customers directly or instead of?
No, it's in addition. So we have a raft, Fabio, of guaranteed service levels, for instance, things around responsiveness, to how quickly we get there and restore a burst water main and all those sorts of things. So we have a whole range of those in our customer charter. These are, I guess, super rebates, if you like, that apply to the whole community as well, because what we wanted to do was we wanted to put at risk the things that the targets that we had that reflected what people expected and valued, and that would push the business to another level of performance. And I have to say, when we first made those commitments as a business, it really focused the entire organisation on achieving those targets. Initially we were having stand-up meetings, is this target at risk or not? What are we going to do? What interventions do we have to make? Because we wanted to keep line of sight to what the community wanted from us.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Flavio. And Juliet, I think you were next. Would you mind introducing yourself and posing your question?
Yeah, I'm Juliet. I'm a customer from Hawthorn. Look, I was interested in the investment in alternate water supplies that Dean mentioned. It's a key interest of mine of sort of getting water back to rivers. And I know there's some actions in the recently reduced Central and Gippsland Region Sustainable Water Strategy about water corporations looking for opportunities to return water to rivers. So I'm wondering how that's reflected in the pricing submission, and also whether the recent announcement by government saying they want to repatriate capital from water corps, whether that has any impact on your ability to invest in alternative water supplies.
Great question. Thanks very much for the question, Juliet. So in terms of the first part of the question, certainly the Sustainable Water Strategy recognises that the impacts of climate change and population growth, we are going to need more water going forward. There's a commitment in there and a recognition that we can't really be affording to take any more water from the environment. In fact, we'll be needing to take less water as time goes by to make sure the environment's looked after. So doubling of water supplies to 2070 and an expectation that that will be through manufactured water sources such as desalination, recycled water and so forth. We have a very significant commitment in our strategy and in our plan around water conservation. That was a theme that came through really strongly from the community about saving water now for the future. We know the more water we save now, we push out the need for new major supplies in the future, which has a huge economic benefit for the city, but also for the environment as well, has a great payoff. So that's really important for us. And targets around leak reduction as well. I mentioned that we're putting a lot of investment into our own infrastructure to make sure that we're addressing any leaks and reducing any of the water that's lost through that system. And probably the big one for us is recycled water. So we have mandated recycled water provision through the whole Northern Growth Corridor. 100,000 homes, a population the size of Canberra, is getting purple pipe for laundry use, car washing, garden use, irrigation, those sorts of things. So that's a really important part of our whole portfolio going forward. So it's an integrated water management. Reuse of recycled water, stormwater is very prominent. Discussion amongst all of the water utilities. We're totally committed to it, and a reduced reliance on water being taken out of the environment. In terms of the capital repatriation, it's sort of a separate process in terms of the economic regulatory approach. Ultimately, we are owned by the government. The government is the shareholder. It's always having an eye to the sustainability of the water utilities, and it makes those decisions around the overarching requirements of the state. So it's sort of a separate process to the way the economic regulatory regime works.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Pat, for that. Pat, there's a question in the chat that you may wish to answer or throw to us, depending on how much you've been focusing on the prices of Yarra Valley Water compared to other water businesses, and also with regards to how the dividend is impacting your cost profile and we can also respond to that question too. But over to you first, Pat.
Well, the first thing I would say is the average bills in Melbourne are the lowest of the capital cities in the country. So I'll start with a national perspective. Within Melbourne, we have the higher bill compared to South East Water and Greater Western Water. There's a bunch of different reasons for that, including the nature of our different businesses. However, it's not too different, and we can see as things go forward, these things jump around a little bit. And one of the things that we've always been conscious of is when we have the higher bills, how do we continue to close the gap for that? But it's not overly material or significant difference. So I think it's pretty good news in the sense of the Victorian water businesses, water utilities are very favourably compared to water bills around the rest of the country. In terms of dividends, again, it's a separate issue. We're probably talking accounting versus economics, but the dividend issue is a government policy, an outcome of the profits that we generate year on year. And in part of that is ensuring that these businesses adopt and run on as much as we can a commercially focused way, and that provides other disciplines to the way we run the business as well. But that again, the people of Victoria, they're ultimate owners of the water utilities, and so whatever dividends we return is money that goes back to the state and is reinvested back into government priorities such as health and roads and so forth.
Thanks, Pat. And we've certainly noted Yarra Valley Water's approach to efficiency, particularly during this period of high cost inflation and the cost of living pressures, and your real price increases and also your nominal ones are certainly of note and have been looked upon favourably. Might just call on Dean to respond to the dividend question as well from our perspective, given there was obviously an article in The Age a couple of weeks ago in that regard. Dean, do you want to jump on?
Yeah, I think Pat briefly covered it too, but I think the important thing is we don't presume a dividend payment in the build-up of prices. What we do allow is a reasonable return for the business on its assets in the model. So that's kind of the element, how it feeds through the pricing framework, if you like, and that's based on like other similar organizations, right? It's a reasonable return for investment in assets and paying back debt and stuff like that. The dividends, how well the business operates will ultimately determine the dividends it pays over the time, I guess, relative to what's factored into the prices. So if it outperforms its cost, dividends might go up, but it depends on a policy decision from government, yes, around that element. So it's not, dividends aren't themselves a direct input to the cost building block.
Thank you, Dean. I'm getting the awful, your internet is unstable, so hopefully you can all hear me still. Is there any other questions, Christina? No? All right, Pat, I might take the chance to ask you a question if you're okay with that. It would be great to hear a little bit more about the hardship assistance programs that Yarra Valley Water is undertaking, given obviously the cost of living pressures at the moment. We are anticipating that there may be greater demand for that sort of thing in the next price review.
Certainly. Thanks, Rebecca. I think I should start by saying that our fundamental philosophy is that access to essential water and sanitation services should not be compromised by a customer's capacity to pay. So we have a whole raft and suite of specialised programs and case management available to any members of our customer base that are finding it hard to pay their bills. And it's a philosophy around a helping hand, not a handout, helping people get back on their feet, tailoring to individual circumstances because they can all be very different. We've done a lot of work in areas like domestic violence, for instance. People would say, well, why is a water utility working on domestic violence? Well, because the perpetrators of domestic violence often use the water account or the water bill as a means of leverage over the victim. So there's a whole level of sophistication in built into our systems. And I speak also on behalf of the other water utilities as well. I know they're all very committed to this, and we've been, I think, from an Australian utilities point of view, I think in Victoria we've been leading the way. But it hasn't been stuff that we've invented by ourselves. It's all been co-created with the welfare sector so that it's actually effective. So for us, we have a water care team that they do the case management. So anyone who falls into that area of vulnerability, they have a case manager who's there for them, who can tailor and find what assistance is available that will help them out. We fast track or help them process things like concessions, utility relief grants, accessing those and so forth. Also bill relief, payment arrangements, and the whole range of other things. And lately, so that's probably enough.
Thanks, Pat. And we do have another question in the chat box from Graham Ross, talking about the fact that if water prices are decreasing, that might facilitate increased use, which isn't great for the long-term, I guess, environmental impacts. Any thoughts on that, Pat, that you might like to share?
Yeah, I think probably the first thought that comes to my mind is that in our experience, water is fairly inelastic in terms of its response to increases. Obviously, if it's a really material increase, people will be conscious of it. But generally, in our experience, that the price doesn't necessarily impact too much demand. My major, I guess, perspective of this is that prices will go up in the long term if we have to accelerate or bring forward new supplies. So the more we can do now to save water, the more we can, reduce that economic impact on the community. Yeah, I think, doing the right thing by the environment, saving water now, it's generally more, people's, motivations around, doing the right thing. Again, the other thing we don't want is the unintended consequences around price, which we really try to balance what that does to livability, what that does to large families, large households, and so forth in terms of their ability to use the product and enjoy the product. So it's a fine balance. I really appreciate the question. It's one of those ones that we do ponder. And
certainly you have a CapEx program that would incorporate infrastructure activity that will hopefully reduce water wastage, et cetera.
Correct. Yeah, but pretty significant investment in not only, our infrastructure, finding leaks and improving the digitisation of our networks so that we can actually, control, monitor and get quicker at our response, but also on the customer side as well. Ultimately, with digital metering, the ability to help households, spot leaks early, save water and so forth is another, longer term proposition.
Thanks, Pat. Marcus, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I wanted to Pat on that. Might you want to say something about restructuring the sewage disposal bill? Because generally, why bills are falling, they're still actually being price signals set by the variable component, and around the state, many businesses are increasing the variable, even if bills are sort of flat or falling. So, but yeah. Sewage disposal, I guess, is a variable charge, but often made very confusing over the years to households and customers. So the changes you're making there probably assist with kind of sending a price signal about conserving water by making it just a bit clearer.
Yeah, exactly, Marcus. That's certainly the intent, and that was what the community was supporting. So this sewage disposal charge is a very sort of complicated, sort of convoluted formula, and I think when people get their bill, they don't realise that it's actually calculated on the basis of the water use coming through the meter. So by combining them, I think hopefully getting two outcomes. One is a simpler bill, but also a more overt pricing signal around usage. And we always have, when we do the consultation, a sentiment of, initially of increasing the usage component of the overall bill and lowering fixed charges. But when the community comes to grips with the fact that when you do that, there's a whole lot of impacts on different segments. For instance, tenants pay the usage, landlords pay the fixed charges. So sometimes you might have more of the vulnerable in the community their bill going up as a consequence of that. So it's a really fine line, very nuanced, that we have to balance with that. But that's the intention. It's a simplification as well as providing hopefully a more overt signal on water use.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Marcus.
Uh-oh. I think we have an internet issue.
Internet issues. I'll just check in. Is there any other questions? Oh, Rebecca's back, I think.
Did I freeze?
Rebecca, yeah. I just asked, is there any more questions? I think that's where you're up to, maybe.
Not getting any questions. Anything else from you, Pat, or do you think it's time to wrap up?
Oh, well, certainly, encourage people to participate in the process. I think this is a really important step in the process, and thank the ESC for giving us the opportunity, and also want to thank our team who have done a lot of hard work to get us to this point.
Thank you, Pat. And with that, I will ask that we close the conversation here, but it's certainly not the end of your opportunity to contribute. So between now and the 10th of March, which is when submissions close, I do encourage you to liaise with Marcus and Dean and the Commission's water team and provide any comments that you would like. On behalf of Commission staff, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to all of you for joining today, and thank you. I will now close the meeting.